All right, folks. We are going to be doing the compromises of the Constitution in this slideshow, and it is about the Constitutional Convention. And so we're going to be just simply going through that, and we'll save the ratification process and the Federalists and Anti-Federalists for another slideshow. The revision of the Articles of Confederation is realized that by some of the wealthy white men who were running the country at this time, and they decided to have a constitutional convention so we could possibly have a new change of government. Now, the original thought here is to revise the Articles of Confederation, not to get rid of originally, but that is what they wound up doing anyway. And some would say that this was actually their plan all along. And Alexander Hamilton is the guy who spoke up at the Congress and said we needed to revise it. So they decided to meet in Philadelphia in May of 1787. 12 of the 13 states actually do show up. Rhode Island is not there. And this is seen later on as a problem. First of all, they're the 13th state to ratify the Constitution out of the original 13, showing that they still had some problems with this. But you have to remember, to revise the Articles of Confederation, you need it to be unanimous. And if one state wasn't there, they would not be unanimous, and therefore nothing would change. But they quickly changed that rule during this convention so that they could just have a supermajority for some of the compromises that they had to deal with. The meeting is held in secrecy. 55 men are there. I think it was 72 who were invited. And again, these were men who were lawyers, landowners. They were the state constitution makers, people who were already influential in the politics of the day. The 5 big names that I have listed, there are other big names, but the 5 that I have listed here are George Washington. He is named the president of the convention. Ben Franklin, who takes care of a lot of the peacemaking between the two different sides. They call him the conciliator. James Madison, he's the man who is considered to be the father of the Constitution. He writes most of it, along with Edmund Randolph. Alexander Hamilton is here. He is a federal government enthusiast. He really likes the idea of a strong central government. And Gouverneur Morris. And his name's not Governor, and it's not spelled Governor, it's Gouverneur, and I'll explain that in class. But he is the one who gets the final wording of the Constitution. He's like the wordsmith. All right. So these 5 men are influential in the process of writing the Constitution. People who are not at the convention. All right. These are some surprises, especially Thomas Jefferson. He is not at the convention. All right. A lot of people think that he writes the Constitution, but he does not. It is James Madison and Gouverneur Morris who have that opportunity. Thomas Jefferson is not there at this time. He's over in Europe. Samuel Adams and John Adams, the rebellious cousins up in Massachusetts, they are not there. Thomas Paine, he's over in Europe as well. John Hancock, the guy who first signed the Declaration of Independence, he is not here. He is the great fundraiser of the Revolutionary War, but he does not have a part of this. And Patrick Henry, obvious individual who is not there because he is a lawyer down in Virginia, but he is not someone who is there. Also, women, slaves, and poor people are not at this convention. And I only make that known. It should be obvious because it's only rich white men. But wanted to put that in there because, when you are constructing a government, you need to think of all sides. And maybe there are some things that are left out that would benefit these individuals if they were there. All right, so once the convention does start, there are a lot of different sides: slave states versus free states, and industrial type states versus agricultural states. But politically, it's the small states versus the large states. And the small states band together, and the large states band together, but they band together against each other. And I listed here the large states and the small states at the time. And I would like you to take a moment. Take a moment and think. What would these two groups want to make sure that they had in a new government so they could get the power? All right, so what would small states want if they wanted to have power in a new government? And what would large states want if they could have power in a new government? So jot down and say my guess. All right? And now we have our 5 main compromises. All right, the 5 main compromises: the Great Compromise, the 3/5 Compromise, the Slave Trade Compromise, Presidential Election Compromise, and the Commerce Compromise. These are 5 big compromises, and I have attached a worksheet. So what I would like you to do is just put this on pause and read the 2 sides for each compromise that I have listed on the worksheet, and come up with what you think would be a good or adequate compromise, and write that down. Okay, so just take a few minutes to do that, and I'll get back to you when you unpause the video. All right, so hopefully you have done your 5 compromises, you read both sides, and now you have jotted down your own personal thoughts. All right, now here's what really happened. All right, the Great Compromise. The Virginia Plan is constructed by Edmund Randolph and James Madison. All right, these 2 men come up with the Virginia Plan of Government. And in this, it calls for 3 separate branches of government. So it would be the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. This plan definitely favors the large states, and it's based on state population. So the larger states would definitely benefit from this plan, because if the more people you had, the more representation you would have in Congress. And the small states definitely did not like this. Congress would have 2 houses in this plan. It was just called bicameral. And the president and the judiciary, the judicial branch, would serve for 7 years. And that's it. 1 term, 7 years, and then they're off. The voters would then elect a House of Representatives. So that would be the only time where people would get the chance to vote. All right, and this sounds very, very similar to what we have today, but there are some aspects that have been changed from this. Now, New Jersey, it's a small state. They don't really like this plan, all right, the Virginia plan. William Patterson comes up with something else, and he says we need to have 3 separate branches of government. All right, so that's the same: executive, judicial, and legislative. But his plan is favoring the small states because it's a lot like the Articles of Confederation, where each state is considered to be equal. All right, New Jersey's plan only wanted to have 1 house in Congress, and he had his plan of executive branch, the presidency, being made up of several people, like maybe 3 or a little bit more. But the state legislators would then be electing the members to the House of Representatives. So you look at this, and there's only a few of the items here that were eventually adopted into the final plan. The final plan is constructed by Roger Sherman from Connecticut. All right, so the Connecticut Compromise is the Great Compromise, and it is by Roger Sherman, and it calls for 3 separate branches of government, and it provides 1 house to be based on population, and the other house would have 2 representatives per state. That's the Senate. The first one would be the House of Representatives. But the 2 representatives per state, they each have their own vote, and that's huge, because the way Congress was before was simply you would have 1 state having 1 vote, and you could have 3, 5, 7, 9, 10, whatever delegates representing each state, and each of them had their own vote, but the majority would always win. All right, so it'd still only be one vote for that entire state. It might be a little bit confusing. I'll try and explain in class. And in the Great Compromise, the president would hold the veto power, which means I forbid. And he would also be the commander-in-chief. I say he because we have yet to have a female president. And the main sticking point is resolved. As I said before, there would be two houses in Congress. The House of Representatives would be the large states liking that, and the Senate, the small states would like this because of the equal number of senators, and they would each have their own vote. The other four compromises: 3/5 compromise, slave trade compromise, the presidential election compromise, and the commerce compromise. You can tell I'm at school, huh? All right. So the slaves in the 3/5 compromise would count as 3/5 of a person, and the South could count their slaves towards population for the representatives' house. So that means that they would actually have more members in the House of Representatives, and the South loves this idea because at the time only 25% of the South is white, and that would definitely give the South a greater advantage, and it would actually make it look like they are part of the large states. The slave trade compromise. Basically, people were upset with the slave trade, and they wanted the slave trade to end, but the South felt that they needed to have the slave trade in order for their economy. So there was a compromise made, and it's basically said that the slave trade would end 20 years after the Constitution is ratified or approved. It is finally ratified in 1788, which means in 1808, slave trade in America ends. All right, and we'll talk about that because I know you're going, but we had slavery until the 1860s, the whole Civil War. All right, but we'll talk about that in class. The presidential election compromise. State legislatures voted in by the people would then vote for an electoral college. The people would not. Nowadays, we vote for the electoral college, but not then. Back then, the state legislatures voted for the electoral college. Who votes the state legislatures in? The people. All right. And then finally, the commerce compromise. And Congress would have the power to regulate foreign trade. And that's a big deal, trying to make sure that it's consistent from one place to another. Remember, we were talking about that earlier, why it was a major issue. All right. The end results. People definitely feared a stronger central government, but these three branches eased those fears because of the checks and balances. And out of the 55 men who show up to this convention, 39 of them actually sign it. 13 of them never got a chance to sign it because they left during the whole compromise period, the whole summer of 1787. But 3 men said, you know what, we don't like this, and we are refusing to sign it. The convention finally ends in September 17th, 1787, which is now known as Constitution Day. And lastly, they said that 9 states had to approve this document before it went into effect. So we have to wait until the 9th state says okay. All right, that's all I'm going to do for now. I'm going to put the other half on a different video, so I'll talk to you later on that. Bye for now.